Jesus, you alone.
Amen. We can just keep that. Jesus, you alone. No one else. No one else except for Jesus. And I don't know whatever you guys need to do to just get in your heart to worship him, to gaze upon him, to think about him, to worship him. But I just want to read this. As we were singing this song, these verses and this idea and this concept was just resonating in my mind. And if you feel comfortable, just close your eyes and envision this with me. Put yourself before the throne where 10,000s of angels are screaming and singing and crying out, holy to the King, the one who alone can save, who alone can deliver, who alone can heal, who alone can bring you out of whatever situation you find yourself feeling trapped in. This is the word of the Lord. And in this book of the Bible, it says that the grass withers and the flowers fade, but his word endures forever. And this is what his word says. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Envision that just for a moment. I saw the Lord. Seek his face, strive to see him. I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. The train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood seraphim. Each had 6 wings. 2 he covered his face, 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one another called to another and said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. The whole earth is full of glory. And the foundations of the threshold of the temple shook at the voice of him who called. And the house was filled with smoke. And I said, woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Are you there? Do you see him? Is that the God you serve? Is that the King that you know? Later on, it says that he took a burning coal and removed the impurities from Isaiah's lips. And from that moment, Isaiah said, here I am. Send me. I was talking to one of my buddies today, and he said, would you do this for free? Would you do this for free? Would you go and share the gospel for free? Would you sacrifice everything? Give it all away? Is it worth it? That's the King we serve. We're going to pray, and we're going to jump right into the continuation of role models and just continue to worship the Lord as we listen to those who are older and those who are wiser than us. So let's pray to the King who is sitting on the throne right now, surrounded by 10,000s of angels. This is the King that we sing to. This is the King that we pray to. This is the God that we worship. Dear Heavenly Father, our Father and our King and our God and our Lord, the one who is so far above us yet so close. We worship you. We seek you tonight, God, and I pray if there's anybody under the sound of my voice who does not know you, God, and just through this song, just through your word, Father, just through your presence, the tangibleness almost of your presence in this moment, God, I pray that if they don't know you, they would seek me out. They would seek those around them out to know you, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Lord, I pray that you would be honored, you would be glorified, you would be magnified in this place tonight. We love you, and it's your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Give it up for BCM Band. Thank you guys so much. Phenomenal. Well, as you guys know, I'm not Joshua G. I don't have my vest on, and I brought a pen up here so I could write this stuff down because he usually forgets stuff. Shout out to Joshua G. We love you, we miss you, but we will be ready for you when you get back. I know that he is a huge influence over my life and just a huge impact over me, and he has taught me so many different things, and I'm sure that he's taught you guys so many different things as well. So we're in a series called Role Models. And I don't know if you guys have been here for the past few weeks, but we have had some phenomenal speakers. We had people from Transformational Church. We had Big John from Woodlands Camp. And last week we had Pastor Brown. And Pastor Brown it was intense. He was talking about how honestly, he was talking about these people in the church who were causing dissension. And he's like, you can either fight me or you can run away. And within like 6 months, 2 of the people died. 2 of the people that were causing tension in the church died. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is incredible. Like, what a crazy story. Just seeing that man's faithfulness, like you prick him and he just oozes out Jesus. Like he just bleeds Jesus. And it was so cool. But tonight, we have a high honor. I have the high honor of getting to interview the one, the only, the Dr. Gene Fant, president of North Greenville University. So if you would welcome Dr. Fant to the stage. Come join.
Hey.
He said, hey. How you doing?
I'm good.
You look good.
You need glasses, obviously, but so First Lady, Miss Lisa, was supposed to be with us tonight, but she got sick. I guess yesterday she started running a fever. She's negative for COVID. Yay.
Praise.
But we just got back from traveling to Texas, and she must have picked up some sort of little bug and all, so she's really bummed. That was the last thing she said as I left the house, was how much she was really going to miss doing this. And she loves you students. It's hard for y'all to know how much she loves you and how hard she works to work on the hospitality at campus, to make sure that we're engaged in the community and engaged with donors and things like that. But she's been a college professor. She's been a high school teacher. And our kids are 22. We have twins, Ethan and Emily, who are 22, about to turn 23. And so we are all about, especially traditional age kids for the higher ed sector. Like you all. And so she sends her regards. She's probably watching this now at the house. I think Emily was going to try and get the technology all amped up and stuff. So anyway, she says, hey. So, you know.
Well, most of you guys know who this is by name, but I would love for you to kind of tell us who you are. And although Lisa's not here, we're kind of focusing on relationships because it is Valentine's Day coming up. But kind of tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump into how you guys met and stuff like that.
Yeah, fun. Okay, we got a great how we met story, so I'll bait that up right now. So I'm a pastor's kid. I'm a pastor's grandkid. I'm a pastor's nephew. We have had Fants, who were Baptist preachers in South Carolina since about 1820. A guy named Ephraim Fant was the first one that we're aware of. I've been to his grave up in Union County, which is pretty amazing. I didn't grow up in South Carolina. I was born in Mississippi, 4th generation of my family to be born there. My kids were born there. My wife, who's from Virginia, which is like being from Europe, said, and they'll be the last generation to be born there because, she's from Virginia. So, that's better than Mississippi, I suppose. But when I was born, my grandfather pastored on one side of town. My dad pastored on another side of town. And then Dad felt called into missions, and we went up to Buffalo, New York, to the area up there. Dad started 9 churches in 7 years, if y'all could imagine that. I made my public profession of faith, asked Jesus into my heart in the parsonage there, the house that we lived in, and it was a house church. So when I made my profession of faith, I walked down the aisle with folding chairs in our living room. Nice. And I was not baptized there, but about a year later, a church gave us a baptistry, and we put it in the garage. So we were the only church in the neighborhood with a baptistry, and when we would baptize people, we would lift the garage door, and everybody would march out of the living room and go to the garage. The neighbors thought we were a cult, which you can sort of understand and all. But then when I was about 11, we moved to Virginia. Dad went to a pretty substantial church in Hampton, Virginia, and he pastored there for over 20 years. He retired once, went into full-time ministry and evangelism, and then at that time we were living in Mississippi, so he ended up with a church in Mississippi. So when our kids were born, pretty much, Mom and Dad lived there, which was a really neat opportunity for them to know my parents really, really well. My parents are still with us, thankfully, and all. So went to college forever. I had a little girl one time who asked me what grade I was in. I said the 25th. I thought she was going to cry, She's like, I'm only in the 2nd grade. And I was like, you have a long way ahead of you, dear heart. But had the opportunity after a while. They were paying me to go to college, which was really awesome.
It's a win.
And that was a good thing. And so ended up going to college for a long time, and we can have a conversation about that and the way that God led. But wanted to be a professor ever since I was a little kid. We actually have the little book when I was in like second grade, what I want to be when I grow up, and it actually says, I want to be a college professor. I want to go to, at that time, Ole Miss, and get a doctorate in dinosaurs. I couldn't spell paleontology, but I could do the dinosaur thing. And so all the way through, it's always been my presumption that I would be a college professor. And then when I became a professor, had a number of mentors who told me, you know, I think you're gifted in administration. And I didn't realize at the time administration is one of the spiritual gifts. It's actually one of the New Testament gifts. And I had always assumed that my gift was teaching. And then I took a different test, and administration was off the charts. And so at that point, I started having mentors speaking into me who said, you know, I think you need to be preparing. God may be calling you to be an administrator, something along those lines. Had no idea. I'd end up becoming a president. And then after I finished my doctorate, I worked for the president of the university, a great guy named Aubrey Lucas. He came to my inauguration at age, I think, 82. He flew in to help lay hands on me at my inauguration. But the last day I worked for him, I was about maybe 30. Last day I worked for him, he said, I've cleared my calendar. I want to talk to you. I think one day you're going to be a college president, and I need to talk to you about what that means. Wow. And so that was a very strange thing, because I just thought I was going to be one of those professors, and my wife would be a professor, and we'd have students at our house and eat popcorn and, you know, watch movies or whatever. Had no idea God would carry me in this direction, and would uniquely prepare Lisa, in fact, for that calling as well, because she's unusually gifted in hospitality, and she's also an academic, which helps me a lot, because I can talk about virtually any topic, and she's able to be iron sharpening my iron. That's awesome. And a needle popping my ego and my balloon when that's appropriate as well. And so it's really cool to have a wife. I can talk about deconstructionism and postmodernism and just about anything, and she is absolutely my match and my equal and all those things. And so God has prepared us as a couple very uniquely, and it's been a lot of fun for 31 years now. Wow. To watch all of that unfold.
Give it up for 31 years. That's impressive. That's so cool. I love that. And in light of, I mean, I bet you guys can already see it, just how much he loves his wife. Like, he talks about her, and it's just like, oh, this man loves his wife. Tell us how you guys met.
All right, so this is a true story. So I'm going to tell a story that's got a risk, because some of the people involved in this story are on Facebook with me.
Oh,
so,
my goodness.
So there had been this girl that I had dated, and we both really liked Duran Duran.
Who?
Duran Duran.
Praise God.
So, you know, and we had broken up and stuff, and I just had this little tiny glimmer that maybe if I could just get her to go to a Duran Duran concert with me. And so I found out Duran Duran was coming, and so I got tickets to Duran Duran. And so she agreed she would go with me for this. And of course she had no idea what I was up to, but I'm a guy. We always have plans, right? We're all macking, as they used to say in the 80s. And so the day of the concert came, and Simon Le Bon had laryngitis and could not sing, and they canceled the concert. Oh. I had been in Florida for 2 weeks visiting with some family friends and had had a great time with them and all. And so I had cut that trip short to come to the concert. Okay. Concert got canceled. So Sunday, it was a Sunday night concert. So Sunday morning, getting ready for church, started looking at the newspaper, and I saw an ad for an English teacher, for a high school English teacher. I just finished my master's, and I felt like at that time maybe God was calling me to do high school for a couple of years until I went back and did some more graduate work and stuff. And so y'all got to understand, big idiot here, okay? So let's just lay this out. So at that time, I had a rat tail and orange hair.
Nice. Come on.
I had an 81 Camaro with T-tops, baby blue. It was sweet. I had just come back from 2 weeks in Florida, including beach time almost the whole time. And so if Beth Jones or her mom Linda are watching this, because they're friends on Facebook, y'all set me up for this. So this is all awesome. And so I saw the ad. So the next morning I got in my Camaro, pulled off my T-tops, and went to go pick up an application because we did not have this thing called the internet back then. So I am not joking about this. I had on pink and green Madras board shorts. I had on a white with hot pink lettering belly shirt. Orange hair, rat tail, and I had on espadrilles. So this is like Miami Vice. I had just come back from Miami. So I drove up to the school board building like that to pick up the application. And so the lady at the counter said, well, tell me about yourself. And so I said, well, I just finished my master's degree, and I've been substitute teaching for a couple of years, have good teaching experience. And she said, well, while you're here, why don't you just go ahead and interview for the job? I am not making this up. And I said, what? And so she sends me to the high school where the former football coach, who's the principal, is interviewing me. And he asked me one question: what sports can you coach? And I said, anything other than wrestling. And he said, you're hired. Let's go ahead and get your paperwork processed. So I went home and I got mugged by a job.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So it was in a town where my dad was best friends with a pastor in the church. And so my dad said, well, let me call my buddy there, and I want to see if there's any other like young people in the church, which meant girls. And so he called and he said, well, actually, we just have a whole group of girls who just graduated from Carson Newman, and they're going to teach. And so, yeah, we actually have some young people. And so I knew on Sunday, when the term started on Sunday, I was going to go visit that church because there were girls there. And so at new employee orientation, I go in, and so it's August. It's right before Labor Day. Virginia starts a little bit later. So I know this is a long story, but it's an awesome story, I promise. So we have to get a tuberculosis test. Day one, you have to do a tuberculosis test. And so I'm left-handed, so I stuck out my right arm. Lisa is right-handed, so she stuck out her left arm. We happened to be standing next to each other in line.
Okay.
And so as we got our tuberculosis test,
Wow.
I had my arm out. I noticed this very lovely brown arm, and I still remember a blue and pink sundress that had kind of this floppy collar. And I looked up the arm, and the arm was awesome, but wow, what it was attached to
Face.
was pretty spectacular.
Come on, Dr. Fant.
And so we didn't talk. And when they went around the room introducing all of us, I realized she said she went to Carson Newman. I was like, oh my goodness, she may be a Baptist. And so it's like my checklist
Gotta be
embodied,
Baptist.
you know? And so at lunch, there were only two seats left in the room. They were across from me. And she sat in one. Her best friend, who went to Carson Newman, sat in the one next to me. And so I ended up asking her out. On our first date, we went to a seafood restaurant, and it was not just a seafood restaurant because of what was on the menu, but our waitress threw up while she was taking our order, and we saw her food. So it was a seafood restaurant on multiple levels. We didn't really notice because we were already, and so I was gobsmacked. I knew if this wasn't it, then I don't know how to calculate anymore. So we got engaged on our 1 year and 1 day anniversary. I was going to propose on our 1 year anniversary of dating, but her sister wouldn't leave the room. Tina.
Come on, Tina. Tina.
Calling you out, girl. And so I went back early the next morning and proposed, and we got married about 6 months later, and it was just absolutely a joy. Now I'll tell you one more thing.
Tell me.
Which is also fun. We've been dating for a little over a month, and we went on a double date with my best friend and his wife. They'd already gotten married, and she was pregnant with their first baby. And so we went back. Lisa was living at her mama's, and we went back to the house. And so we were just, her mom was like, well, tell me about the date. Y'all have fun, all that. So I was explaining, who these people were and everything. And she said, that's really weird. My best friend from high school has a daughter named Teresa who's married to a guy named Kenny, and she's pregnant. And I said, wait a minute, Teresa Murray? And she said, yeah. And so my best friend and I married the daughters of best friends from high school.
Oh my goodness.
And when we got our wedding our invitation list together, we had like 20, 30 people who overlapped on the list. And we had never met before. I mean, and then we started figuring out we had been in the same room for her cousins sang in a singing group that I used to sing in that was sort of like Joyful Sound. That's another long story. So I was at her church to see people sing because it was close. My dad did a revival at her church, and her best friend's dad got saved at that revival. I mean, it's just really, really, really spooky stuff. And so, once we started kind of unraveling this and starting to feel like we had a shared sense of calling that was beginning to emerge, it was pretty spooky at that point.
That's so crazy.
So it was awesome.
What
so
a story.
There you go. So
come on. So you mentioned a shared sense of calling right there at the end, and just kind of to transition into that, one thing that I think most of us are looking for in a significant other is being able to do life together, but also to do ministry together. And I know you and Lisa have co-authored a book together. And so tell us a little bit about that, and as well as doing ministry alongside of her, and what that looks like for you.
So both of us have always been teachers, and she went into that for more practical reasons maybe than anything else, but she's really talented as a theorist in education, and so she also did some administration, served as a director of instruction at a school, and has published actually a lot on what they call curriculum and instruction and stuff like that. But as we were trying to figure things out, we both really wrestled with a call to missions, and we might drop a pin and come back to that if you want to do that. But we started to feel like God was going to call us to serve at colleges where a lot of kids were interested in missions. I called them missions hothouses, and literally each of the schools that we've been led to at the university level have been those kinds of places. But the thing you're referencing on the book is actually a pretty funny story. So we wanted to have kids. We spent the first half of our marriage terrified that we would get pregnant because we were so poor. We were in school. We were trying not to take on any more debt. And so we were scared to death that we would get pregnant. Then when I got a job, we got finished with school, all of a sudden we weren't getting pregnant. And we weren't getting pregnant, and we weren't getting pregnant. And so we started going down that path of trying to figure out how to navigate infertility, and then the possibility that we might never have children, and what does that look like. And this is a really difficult thing sometimes for couples to really navigate through. By the way, let me mention this as well. John Duncan, the Dean of the College of Business and Entrepreneurship here at the university, my wife and I, and he and his wife, we were in the same Sunday school class going through all this at the same time back in Clinton, Mississippi, and they got pregnant and had twins, and we were like, they're bogarting the babies. This is not fair. So Dr. Duncan and I go way back. Our dads actually were friends. But when we were going through all that, I went to a bookstore one day and I thought it'd be really cool if I could get a devotional book for us to do, that if we ever, it's like an act of faith. When we get pregnant, not if we get pregnant, when we get pregnant, we can work through this book together. And when I went to the bookstores, I couldn't find such a book. Well, I'm a writer, had done lots of article publishing and things like that, but never anything of a book length. And so I made a little note that, well, maybe if we get pregnant, we could write that kind of a book. And so I actually, when we got pregnant, I sent a pitch to the publisher, Zondervan. They had a college intern who was working in the mailroom, and her job was to open random mail. And if she liked the proposal that was in it, she would take it to the editors. And so I don't know who she was. I've never heard a name attached to it, but a random college intern read it and thought, I'd buy that for a shower gift. Gave it to the editor. So the editor calls me and she says, well, the problem is, though, you can't write a book for couples. You need your wife to help you write it. So at this point, we're pregnant.
Okay.
I think we were maybe at that point about 4 or 5 months pregnant, and so I had to go to my very pregnant wife and tell her, by the way, we got a book contract. I didn't tell you about it. Most of our marriage has been me mugging her with things, and so that's, by the way, a great lesson for those of you who want to be married guys. Don't mug your wife as much as I have. The last degree I did, which was my 5th degree, I didn't tell her I was doing it. She figured it out. She thought I was playing softball. Because I would actually carry my softball bag out with me on Tuesday, Thursdays when I was going to class. So she just assumed I was playing softball. Gosh. And after a while, she was like, "How long is this season?" I was like, "Well, I'm doing another degree," and she was like, "What?" And so this was another similar thing. I got a book contract for us, honey. What? When's it due? Well, the kids are due in April, and we've got to have it by June 1. So yeah. And so after the kids were born, I'm not making this up. If she were here, she would vouch for me on this. After the kids were born, she would nurse the kids at 7, and we would write and edit until 9 or 10.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then we'd put the kids down, and then during whatever breaks we had the rest of the day, we would try to do stuff and prepare it to come together. And so I still remember sitting in the floor of our den, because back then it was actually a hard manuscript. You did a disc, but it was really a hard manuscript that they used. And so the book came out, and came out in 1999. I guess it was. The kids were born in '98, and it's stayed in print now for 21 years, which is really incredible in publishing. And we haven't made like $1 million off of it or anything, but it's been a joy to have that out. We, by the way, send that to alums who are expecting, and so any alums that may be watching this, if you've got somebody, Lamont Sullivan can get you an autographed copy of the book, and we'll send that to you, and so forth. But what's really cool is to hear couples talk about how the book brought them together, and in some cases, we've heard about even spouses that have come to know Jesus through the book. We have the plan of salvation in there and everything. And one of the things we discovered with the twins is that 50% of couples who have twins get divorced before the kids are 2.
Wow.
It's higher than the average for most divorces happen when at least one kid in the house is 2 or younger. And as you have more multiples, it actually goes up. So I think with triplets, it's 70-something%.
Oh my goodness.
And so it is incredibly stressful on a marriage. When we see couples with kids with twins and strollers, I often walk up and go, it gets so much better. One day they'll like play with each other and you'll get sleep. It's really awesome. And our kids are just a crazy joy for us. But that was the first project that we did, and then Lisa's an editor par excellence, and so as I've continued doing publishing things, she's always been one of the ones that I've turned to be a great editor and a sounding board, and she's given me the liberty to do that. I remember the second book that I did, God as Author, which is literary criticism. She actually gave me permission to lock myself in my office for a week. And so I would stay up there till 2 or 3 in the morning listening to Lincoln Brewster and the Smiths.
Nice.
There's your combination. And trying to bang that thing out. Because she told me, she said, I think this is a really important book and you need to finish it. You don't need it hanging over your head. And so she's been just an incredible encourager and things like that that are actually pretty time consuming and
That's so cool.
distracting. So
That's awesome. So to transition a little bit more into focusing on relationships, a lot of us aren't in relationships. And I have 5 categories written down, just like where people are at in general. And there's those who are single and just chilling. They're not looking for a relationship. They're just out there single, keep moving forward, not looking for anything. Then there's those who are single and they're seeking something out. They're looking for a relationship. Joshua G says they're single and ready to mingle. Can't you see him saying that? I can see him saying that. They're single and ready to mingle.
they're sitting on swings with nobody by them, just going.
We all know those people. Don't be those people. The third one is a dating relationship, those who are currently dating. 4th is engaged to be married, and the 5th one is married couples. Just to kind of move into that, just going to take it step by step, what would you say to those who are not in a relationship, single, and not even looking for a relationship? How would you address them and give them some advice? And we'll go right through each category.
This is some of the most amazing people I've known in my life were people who actually have never been married. They were single, and in some cases it was an intentional thing. In other cases it was the product of something that happened, maybe relationships that went off the rails or whatever. But some of the most amazing people I've known are people who've been in that. They really weren't. They're just trying to love Jesus and serve others and all, and that's pretty daggone awesome. It really is. And the church doesn't do well sometimes with people that are in that situation. I've had a lot of friends who have not gotten married for the first time until they've been in their 40s, and a couple of them who were even in their 50s and 60s. And they've had incredibly productive ministries during that season of singleness, some of which did go all the way through their entire lives and all. And so, what defines us is Jesus. Relationships don't define us.
So good.
And it's one of the things that I would say to all of these categories is your a significant other is not your Jesus.
Yeah.
So Depeche Mode may talk about having your own personal Jesus, but that doesn't work in real life in relationships. And so the tendency that we have, especially in, I'm going to call it a post-Disney culture, where we have watched people have boyfriends and girlfriends, whatever, all through our lives, an other does not define you. An other enhances what God is doing in you. And so what I can see in my own life was I gave up. I mean, I was like, once the Duran Duran concert got canceled, man, I was like, I'm not dating, I'm not looking, I'm nothing, I'm going to get a cat, I'm going to be that guy,
Cat.
you know, and that's just the way that it's going to be. And during that, and that was a fairly short season for me, it was really the length of a summer. But that was a very sweet season because God was doing things in me, and I was really beginning to understand myself by light of, and this is the problem we have in our culture is we want to identify ourselves, we want to be distracted and to identify ourselves by things apart from God.
Yeah.
And that's idolatry. And so if you make an idol out of yourself, that's a problem. If you make an idol out of another person, that's also a really big problem. And so we can't find our satisfaction in another person. And so during that first stage and I'm not even going to call it a stage, during that first category, because it's not necessarily that all of these go right? But during that, when you're in that stage, that's an incredible time to pour your energy, your resources into loving God and loving others in ways that are not distracted by a third party or
That's
something
so
like
good.
that.
And I mean, I hear that and I think things that I've been told before and that I've told some guys over here before, that your most important ministry is your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And from that flows everything else. So if you're focusing on him, if you're seeking him, the next steps will naturally reveal themselves. You just got to keep walking in faith and invest in your relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's the first category. And you talked about idolatry. And I'd love for you to address some dangers of idolizing a relationship, specifically to the second category of single and seeking out a relationship, seeking those, trying to find somebody that they can date.
Yeah. So the times in my life when I've been the most unhappy and when I realized that I was at my spiritual weakest were the times that basically were in the wake of me being over-invested in relationships and those relationships falling apart. And so I can go back to those times, and I was not a good person. I was not a nice person. I was very selfish. I was very narcissistic. And a lot of that had to do with I had invested so much in someone else, even as I would talk about, well, one day I'm going to go, serve God and whatever. What I really want to do is just, have a hot chick, by my side as I'm in my Camaro at that time. And so when I look back on those times, I really do see that where, for some people, God has called them to singleness, and they really don't have that longing. But there are others that God has clearly not called to singleness, and he has placed in their hearts a particular longing. And the world loves to twist godly longings, right? And so I think about those times and how, I would just be emotionally devastated because you're either here or you're there or, whatever. And then you just at some point, your friends have an intervention. Have y'all had that experience? They're like, dude, it's time to get over this, right? So I had, in fact, at some point, let's talk about my godly friends, because that's actually a huge part of my journey of sanctification was the circle of guy friends in particular that I had around me. He's taking a test, by the way, while he's doing this. So.
I'm writing this stuff down. I brought my pen, Joshua G. The third one is dating relationships. And I would just love to hear some make it or break it questions that should be asked or that should be addressed when someone's dating, whether it's religious beliefs, whether it's boundaries, just what are some kind of make it or break it that these questions need to be addressed before another step is taken within the relationship.
Yeah, so I want to talk about accountability. In fact, I'll go ahead and talk about my friends in that context and my parents as well. My parents liked almost every girl that I ever brought home that I was dating. And in hindsight, the ones that they didn't like, I really should have taken that a lot more seriously, a lot faster. Now, I'm not talking about if your parents criticize everybody that you bring home. That's a different ball of wax. And there are some parents that do that. They're just obnoxious about it. Or what, nobody's good enough for my little girl, or, I remember I have a family member who went on his very first date in his life, and when the dad went to pick up the girl for the young man who was on his very first date, the girl's dad answered the door in his police officer's uniform, complete with sidearm. And I thought that was a little scary, maybe. But I should have listened a little bit better to my parents. They were pretty good judges about things. But then my guy friends, we had a strange church. We had no girls in our church. We had 2 girls and 20-something guys. Wow. In our Sunday school class, in our singles class. And I could get into all the demographics. We hired consultants. We had research firms. It was pretty amazing. But we held each other accountable in unbelievable ways. And it was often that we would say, you are not better when you're with her, or she doesn't treat you right. And my wife had a circle of friends who did a similar thing, where they would basically say, I don't like the way he treats you. And if you're not gonna be my friend anymore, then tough. And so if you're going out with somebody and your parents don't like him and your friends don't like him, there's nowhere good that can go, I'm sorry. There's just not. And that leads to really hard decisions. Yeah. Really hard decisions. And if there's been physical intimacy involved, that makes it even more difficult. But what I tell people all the time, better a heartache now than a heartache in the future with 3 kids. Yeah. And I've had friends that have gone down those hard roads. And so the question that I tell students, especially when they're dating and they're wrestling with all this, is it's actually twofold. One is, does this person make you better than you are without that person? Do you like yourself better with this person? Do they edify you? Do they lift you up? Do they encourage you? Whatever. And then the other one, interestingly enough, is kind of a flip version of that, and that is, does this person make you to love Jesus more? I mean, if you're having to drag somebody to church, then what's the point? Because here's where it gets. Ultimately, relationships, if they continue, relationships lead to marriage. And then I know this is shocking to hear on a Baptist college campus, but marriage sometimes leads to children. There are things that happen. And, that's the kind of, is this the kind of person I want to raise my kids? Is this the kind of person I want to have to go through getting fired from a job with? And is this the kind of person that I'm willing to help clean up vomit at 3 o'clock in the morning when they've had the flu or whatever? And so there's just lots of questions. And again, I think you've got to find you'll never find anybody that's perfect. And that's the other thing, is that on the one hand, the stakes are high, but the stakes are not also as high as we want. Everybody wants somebody that's perfect. And I hate to tell you, but you're not going to find anybody perfect, because guess what? You're not perfect. And so, I had a friend growing up, and he would never date girls because he was so stinking choosy, And I remember my favorite story is one time I was like, hey, that girl likes you over there. And he was like, and I was like, well, what's wrong with her? She's beautiful. She's godly, whatever. And he said, look at her legs. And I said, what? And he said, she's got some kind of rash on her legs, man. I don't know what's up with that. And I said, those are textured hose. What is wrong with you? Go get a copy of Glamour, for the love of Pete. And so he would come up with these hilarious, in hindsight, hilarious things. And so it's almost like it's like, you've got, it's kind of like your M&M, you've got your one shot, you're throwing up mom's spaghetti, and you want it to be perfect. That was just a little rap joke for you there.
That was solid.
And so on the one hand, the stakes are higher than we understand because we haven't been down that road, but on the other hand, the stakes are also oddly lower than we think that they are. We think that it's supposed to be perfection, but that's not the way God does anything with us. God puts us into relationships to become more perfect, right? Through His light and His direction and so forth. And so that's the cool thing. You don't have to be perfect. And the older I get, the more I really understand this phrase. Pretty much everybody's doing as good a job as they can. And you just need to cut people slack, And so when you're in a dating, especially a serious dating relationship, or when you get married or you're down the road, cutting the other person's slack. I mean, I think theologically we call that grace, right?
Yes, sir.
But we all need grace, and we all need to be agents of grace. We all need to be agents of reconciliation. And, you know, when there's things like conflict, you know, there's this old chestnut about never let the sun go down on your anger. My experience with my wife has been that most of the time when we're mad at each other, the sun was down hours ago. And so I say, go ahead, go to the guest room if you need to, but work that out before the sun goes down the next day. And a lot of times I found that actually to be a pretty effective thing. I think it's the Brady Bunch where Mike says, "Don't let the sun go down on your anger, Brady." And I'm like, bad advice from a
Bad advice.
fake father.
You mentioned godly friends, and I think that's been so huge in my life, and I'm sure a lot of you guys can attest to that. But having those hard conversations, they're hard. They're difficult to bring up, to warn people of like, this isn't you, and you're not yourself when you're around this person. Taking it a step further within the relationship to engaged couples, sadly, I mean, a lot of us have seen couples get engaged, get married, and then it end in a disaster. How can you avoid those pitfalls, kind of building off godly friendships and other people around you, but how can you avoid your marriage and your relationship ending up in a disaster through difficult engagement?
Yeah. Well, and I think the first thing is you can't control everything, right? And so there will be people who have done everything right, quote unquote, and they still find themselves in a difficult situation. Mm-hmm. But I think that especially once you start heading in that direction, wise counsel, I see couples that get engaged that a lot of times they end up so coupled off that they cut themselves off from all the rest of their friends. And that's usually not a good thing. It's not that it's necessarily a warning sign, but I just don't think it's a good thing. I think you need to continue those relationships because guys need guy friends and girls need girlfriends. And couples that will do that and end up over here off on the side, a lot of times that ends up setting a pattern for isolation. And isolation, even isolation, you can end up with two people who are isolated in the same household. And I think that actually starts sometimes during that season. And so, you know, when Lisa and I were engaged, half the couples we knew were engaged. In fact, let me drop this little weird one on you. So I told you we had about 20 guys and 2 girls in my Sunday school class. Her Sunday school class had about 12 girls and 1 guy who was their cousin. We used to call him Moses because he could like look upon the promised land, but he could not there go unto. And so it's just a little joke there. And so I had a cookout. I remember I walked into that church, my dad's friend's church, and I looked down the pew, and there were all these beautiful girls. I was like, whatever, you know. And so I had a cookout like 2 weeks later, and we had, I think, 5 weddings in 18 months out of that cookout. Goodness. Now, here's the crazy thing. Okay, now this is the thing I'm going to drop on you that's really crazy. So out of that 20-something guys and 2 girls, and out of that about 12 girls and 1 guy, if you take the 5 that got married out of that and so forth, it's about 10 or 12 couples. We now have 0 divorces and average 28 years of marriage.
Wow.
Do y'all understand statistically what that is? I mean, that's crazy. We have 1 who's lost a spouse through death. We have a few who have never married. But I have many dear friends who've gone through the trauma of divorce, but I've never had any of my closest, dearest, most intimate friends who've ever gone through the trail of a divorce. I mean, it's shocking.
That's awesome. Statistically
speaking, and I think a lot of it comes from that accountability. And again, you never know. I have dear godly friends, men and women, who have things have happened and there's been betrayals or there's been in some cases mental illness or whatever that have changed things, but it's a pretty amazing thing to watch. And so I just encourage couples, learn how to as you start getting more serious, get into those rhythms. Ask people you know, adults who know you, do you see this as a good thing? I remember my college roommate, his wife Tracy's on Facebook with me, so I don't know if she'll see this or not, but I still remember my college girlfriend at the time and I were back at the dorm, and he came in and he said, "I think Tracy likes me." And I really like her. And we were like, "Finally, you're an idiot. We've been trying to rig this up for months. What is wrong with you?" You know? And and it was hilarious when he finally, it was like the switch came on, and he was like, oh, and then they got married in like 14 months, But all of us in their friend circle were like, oh, this is so going to happen at some point, and it's going to be hilarious. And again, they're just godly people, and just love to have seen what God's done in their lives.
That's really good. A few categories ago, we talked about make it or break it's. I would love to hear what were some of your make it or break it's in your relationships.
Well, I think the biggest thing is this a person, my mom always said, because you're an egghead and a nerd.
Your mom loved you a lot, didn't she?
She does. She spanked my behind a lot. So, but she always said, my brother and I talk about this a lot as adults now, that she always said, you guys have got to marry smart girls. Because you're going to need somebody who can help you because you're wired that way. And so I know the first time Lisa and I went out, I mean, it was so obvious she was so stinking smart, and had that arm that I was talking about before.
Nice arm.
And so, the make it or break it thing. I remember I had a relative who told me one time who had gone through really messy divorce, just a really messy divorce as a relative, and he said, I wish I had understood now that the physical part of the relationship can never be the foundation of the relationship. And he had married somebody because of a very intense physical relationship that they had. And I remember taking so many of these things to heart and everything. And so, when Lisa and I were dating and it was starting to head that way, then I remember those kinds of, so there were theological things. I wanted to make sure that we were basically on the same page about things, and she felt very strongly about that as well. There were even some things related like parenting and finances. Please talk about finances before you get married. Please talk about finances. Talk about things like how many kids you want. And the funny thing about kids is kids changes, because most guys are like, yeah, if I have kids, whatever, And the girl's like, I already have the names picked out, honey. You just need the nursery and it's one of those things that as guys, we don't get. But as we were married longer and longer, I began to really long for that as well, partly because, I longed for that particularly shared thing that happens in parenting and stuff like that. And so there were things about that. There were so again, theological things, financial things, getting with wise people that are helping y'all to ask each other questions, because again, the tendency that you have is to end up getting isolated, and a lot of times what happens when you isolate as you get more intense is you don't talk about substantial things. You're having experiences, you're smooching or whatever it is, and you end up not having the kinds of conversations that I think can help you ultimately discern. It's almost like you make the decision and then you try to backtrack and justify the decision.
Wow.
And that's just not a good thing.
You mentioned that physicality cannot be the foundation of a relationship, and everybody in this room has been bombarded, constantly enamored by the culture to almost gear towards sexuality. Everything is driven by our eyes, our instant gratification. It appeals to physical nature, and it kind of pushes out what the Bible says about physicality. How would you give me some advice on that aspect? And like, when should we hit the brakes really, really hard, and when should we kind of let off the brakes and let the gas run a little bit?
Yeah. Josh said he was going to ask that question, and so I've been trying to think through the best ways to talk about that. I know many people who regret decisions they made on physicality. I know absolutely no one who regrets not being involved with physicality, if I've articulated that well. And so, I think it's really important. It's just right now you're in college, right? And we've got like Dylan and Lori watching out for y'all. So y'all got to go if y'all want to be alone or whatever, you got to go find places to make that happen. But when you get older and all of a sudden you've got your own apartment, and all of a sudden you have private space and stuff like that, it definitely changes what that looks like in terms of managing that and dealing with that and stuff like that. And so again, I think people have to make a really strong commitment. My parents always said this, that's not about physicality, but it actually is about physicality. My parents taught me a hard, fast rule, which is when you get married, divorce is not an option. In fact, it's so not an option that you don't even joke about it being an option. So in 31 years of marriage, I don't believe Lisa or I have ever made a joke about, well, one of these days, never made a joke about that. And if I have, honey, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking, I guess. But I think actually if you backtrack that back out, I think that even goes to the physicality stuff and dealing with temptation and God has wired us in particular ways. And I'll go back to what I said before. God has wired us as humans in particular ways. And the world loves to take truth and twist it. The world loves to take God-given things and twist it. And often when that happens, it's twisted in ways that end up altering a path just slightly. And so I think that sometimes those paths that are twisted just slightly sometimes can end up accumulating into other things. And so, as I counsel students, as I counsel young adults and even some middle-aged adults and stuff like that, you almost have to make decisions before you're at the point of decision. And then you have to stick to your guns along those ways and do those things. And so I really want to encourage people to not only to be strong, but to be of good cheer as you are being strong, because God's good things are God's good things. And when we short circuit those things, it's not an unforgivable sin. And for some people that actually find themselves in abuse situations, or they're in a situation where they've made poor choices that have then placed them into a bad situation, which doesn't justify anything that happens. Don't hear me say that, but I mean, we lead lives, and sometimes in life things happen, and God is faithful to restore what the locusts have eaten. And so forth. And so I think that these are just really important things. And again, our world wants to elevate everything to the level of identity. And so it loves to take who we are and twist that for deformed purposes instead of for perfecting purposes. And God wants you to be prepared to be perfected ultimately as you are with him in heaven. And so everything in this world is teaching us to love him more and teaching us to know how much he loves us as well. And that's another thing. My life's verse is 1 John 4:19. We love because he first loved us. And one of the things that I'll say sometimes that students are a little taken aback by is, I don't cheat on my wife because I love my wife. I do love my wife, and I don't cheat on her because I love her. But the main reason I don't cheat on my wife and that I have rules is because God loves me. Because my love for my wife may ebb and flow. As normal life happens, you have ebbs and flows. My love for her may ebb and flow, but his love for me and for us never ebbs and flows. And it is constant. And so as we try to find our identity in him, it really changes, I think, the way that we work. And so, it's hard because, again, there's so much out there. There's so much that teaches us falsehood. There's so much out there that whispers in our ears, and so much out there that loves to see. In Christopher Marlowe's play, Dr. Faustus says this classic line, "Misery loves company," and our world is miserable, and they want us to be miserable too. Yeah. And one of the ways they want you to be miserable is to give in to temptation. Yes. Because if they can knock you down, then they feel better about themselves. It's called Schadenfreude, for those of you who know you're German. So,
and that's so true. Like the aspect of temptation, I think in many different ways than in years past, we have it at our fingertips. Like at our very fingertips, we can make a call right now. We can make a text right now. We can go on Instagram right now. We can go on Snapchat right now. There's so many different avenues and outlets. And something that I've been taught growing up, and I'm sure some of you guys have heard this as well, but like the aspect of getting close to the line of quote unquote sin, and how we just love to kind of tiptoe up to the line and just kind of look at it and kind of get a little bit closer and kind of like just peek our head over when we shouldn't even be getting close to the line in the first place. like our whole desire should be for holiness, for godliness. And so Joshua G gave me a verse that I should just share. I just want to read it to you guys. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness. And I would just like to ask you, what are some good boundaries? Like, do we just need to completely get off social media entirely? Just some boundaries, some personal boundaries that you think we should set up in order to pursue righteousness.
You know, I don't follow Instagram and all that stuff that closely, but I just saw today going through my news feed that there was an Instagram influencer who committed suicide, I think, over the weekend. And I keep seeing social media influencers who are committing suicide at a young age. And my heart breaks for those families, for those kids. And if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, you need to see The Social Dilemma and understand how you are being manipulated for the monetization of others. And I think for different people, it's different things. There's some people that it's an edification thing. My mom had a stroke back in November, and Dad's been using social media to do updates on her. And when I was at their house last weekend, they had like 100 and something cards that people had sent them. And that was all coming off of social media, that people had seen the updates. And so I see that, and I'm like, yay.
Yes.
But then I watch people struggle with self-image, with the temptation for recognition and stardom, so to speak. Anybody that spends on social media knows this. You post something, and then you go, I got 1,000 likes on that or whatever, and it's so tempting to buy into all of that. But there's just, different people have different kinds of temptations, different struggles and all. And so again, I'm really big on things like accountability and stuff like that, you got to think through things, whether it's temptation of a sexual kind or it's temptation of an ego kind. But if things make you feel worse about yourself, that's not of God. Okay, there's a difference between the conviction of sin and the oppression of people whose opinion you really shouldn't even care about, right? Because they sure don't care about you. And so again, I know I took Facebook off my phone, and I got my little weekly report on how much time I had spent on my phone, and it said the first week it said, I shouldn't say this because Lisa's going to see this, but I went ahead and took it off because I was like, I'm so tired of it pushing political stuff instead of the connections that come with friends and stuff like that. And my screen report said that my screen time had declined 56% that week.
That's incredible.
I was like, should have done this a long time ago, because and for what effect, right? So I mean,
that's good.
If you see I'm not posting on Facebook as much anymore, that's part of it. As I was like, I got other things I need to
That's
do.
good.
And I put a Facebook post up the other day about my parents, and I said that it was so awesome to be in their house and see the original social media, American Greetings and Hallmark, in a pile on the couch next to them. That it was actual cards and letters and people calling them and stuff like that. So,
I love that. I love what he said. Each person has different temptations. That means each person should have, to some extent, different boundaries. So now there are rigid boundaries in Scripture that we should not cross, that are very clear. Do not commit murder. Okay, absolutely. We should set that boundary. But there are certain things that people struggle with individually that I don't struggle with. And there are certain things that I struggle with that you may not struggle with. And so knowing yourself and knowing your tendencies and being able to set up boundaries, biblical boundaries, for those specific temptations that you deal with, I think is extremely important to living a life that pursues righteousness rather than that chases after the world.
I got a funny story for you.
Hit me.
I'm warning whoever's working the cameras, I'm getting up. So
My goodness.
the group that I work with has a residential thing where students live and all that. And there was a young man who got in trouble for breaking the rules. And so he had to stay on campus over the weekend. And the phrase that they used was, "You cannot leave the property this weekend." And so he was sulking. He was really mad about it. And one of my friends who worked in Res Life at this thing said he saw him on Saturday on the property line, and he was doing this. And he literally walked down the property line doing that. And I thought that was really a fun, I'm sitting back down now. I thought that was a really funny thing, but I thought about that's actually a pretty good metaphor for what a lot of us do with temptation. Mm-hmm. We'll walk that line and we'll stick that little foot over every now and then. We're like, oh, that's not, yeah. And then at some point you step in a hole and you fall over, and then you're like down the road and you wonder, you know, how did I get here? This is not what the plan was, you know. And so, you know, and that's, we like to stick that little foot, or look around and go, nobody's like, let me just stick that little foot right over there.
For sure. Well, I have 4 questions. This is the lightning round, as Joshua G likes to call it. And this is like 30-second answer, boom, boom, quick hitters. And the first one is, who were your role models growing up?
My dad, I'm Gene Fant Jr. I have literally, I know people overuse this phrase literally, but I have literally been in a grocery store, in a whatever, back in the hometown in Mississippi, and people have walked up to me and said, "You're Gene Fant's son, aren't you?" I look so much like my dad. My brother and I sound exactly like my dad. Lisa used to be scared to death that we would play pranks on her because we sound so much alike. It's really freaky. And so Dad's been a great role model of fatherhood, of ministry. He came from a dysfunctional household. And so my grandfather did not become a believer until the middle of life, and so Dad had to deal with a lot of that. And Mom also, Mom had such a huge influence on me in terms of creativity and the idea of chasing after things that you feel like God is laying on your heart. My mom's family, the Hankinses, do not understand the word no or you can't do that. They are the most dogged, determined people you have ever seen in your life. And so I can't imagine how my parents put up with my strong-willed nature. In fact, one of my favorite childhood memories of how strong-willed I was. So, Jody, you got kids, man, so you can dig this. They had a rule: I couldn't leave the table unless I cleaned my plate. I was a strong-willed child. I used to sleep at the table.
Oh, my goodness.
And one time, there was a bowl of corn that I was not eating, and I slept at the table. And the next day I had to go to the library to do a book report or something. I was in about 5th grade, and this is back when the hippies were around, so it was in the early 70s. And my mom was like, well, he's got to go to the library, but he hadn't eaten his corn. So they put the corn in a bowl, and I had to carry the bowl around with me in the library. And so I still remember there's this hippie girl who walked up to me, and she goes, "Hey, kid, what's with the corn?" And I said, I didn't want to eat it, so my mom says I have to carry it around with me, and she said, "Can I eat it?" And I said, "Sure." So she ate, it's like 2 days old in this bowl and stuff. So I got that hard-headed stuff from my mom's side of the family, and both sides of the family were hard-headed, but got that. And so, you know, having the confidence to go do something and all, definitely my mom's side of the family. But those are people who deeply influenced me. I had a high school teacher who really influenced me academically. He was not a believer, and in fact was pretty hostile toward believers. But he deeply impacted my idea about what it means to be an intellectual and to be an academic and to think broadly and so forth. Hugely influential. I had a great Sunday school teacher, a guy named David Woolwine, who was there at the right time in my life, and he's the teacher that I had when I was being stupid, would pull me out and just go, "Dude, what are you doing? Stop it," you know. And there are others, Mike Chance, my youth pastor. There are just tons and tons and tons of. I could go on. Had the blessing of having a lot of those folks when I was y'all's age.
That's wonderful. If you could have one person, quote unquote, mentor and be a role model for you in the future, have any one person, you get to choose one person to mentor you, who would you choose? I'm going to have to choose a person from history, not a person alive. That's fine.
Okay, so George Washington
is
a fascinating historic character. And You know, everybody historically has complications. There are no such things as perfect people. But I'm a president, and he is a president.
That's true.
And he went through many different seasons of his life where he was in leadership, and his constant willingness to see it as a season instead of an entitlement was huge. And so I've read everything I can get my hands on him. I've got plaques, I've got busts, I've got, you know, all kinds of stuff. And so the cool thing is that through biography and autobiography, we can have the great people of history mentor us even now, which is a pretty cool thing. And so I think it was maybe W.B. Du Bois that talked about the importance of reading the lives of great men and women and allowing what they learned and what was displayed through them to come back and do that. And so maybe it was Booker T. Washington, actually, because he talks about that when we forget the lives of the people who've made history, because history tends to forget about people. That's a weird thing, that history would forget. But so I'm constantly reading biographies and autobiographies and things like that, and just trying to be mentored by a lot of this. The kind of job I have, it's hard. I do have a couple of people who mentor me now. A guy named John White, who has been deeply influential on me. There was another guy, a guy named Mike Barnett, who actually used to be the Dean of Missions over at Columbia International. He's deceased now, died way too young, but he was deeply influential on me and Lisa and the thoughts that we had about what missionality and intentionality looks like. John White is Mr. Intentionality. He's somebody that's had a huge impact on me as well, and there's a lot of that.
I love that. Last question, I'm going to combine the last two. What are some qualities of a good mentee, and how can a student find a good mentor?
Yeah, so that's always a hard thing, because the people you want to mentor you are typically the busiest people around. and so I think what happens a lot of times when you're in your 20s is you expect too much from mentors, and people will be like, well, we got to meet every week. We got to have, whatever. And so what I encourage people to do is to do what I call hit or miss mentorship. And so it may be that all you can do is get together once a semester or whatever, but that you're watching, you're listening, you're learning, and it may be possible that you fall into something that's a little bit more like that. But by and large, most of the people that have mentored me, I think we measure mentorship like this instead of like this sometimes, and that we can see that coming through a longer period. We think it should be more intense, and sometimes it is intense. There are some people that are wired that way. There are some mentors that are wired that way. I was more of a tour mentor than a mentor, I think, as a faculty member. That's a little joke for you there that apparently nobody got. I think it's a funny joke, but I'm not so much a mentor as a tour mentor, but I used to fail a lot of students. But then I would mentor them back to health. It was awesome. But yeah, I think the main thing is that I think you pray, and I think that God will supply the right person at the right time for the right season, and I think that all can happen as well. But the stakes are both high and low. It's a little bit like the dating thing. That we want it, we crave it, we need it, we know that it's there, but I think sometimes we end up moving the bar so high that it ends up kind of being,
Yes, sir.
non-functional. So.
Absolutely. Well, give it up for Dr. Fant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Fant. The BCM band is going to come back up, and we're going to continue to lead in worship. Before we are sent out, before we are deployed, because we don't just sit here and receive information, we take it out and we go apply it. Before we do that, there's a camp in the back. If you're looking for an immediate opportunity, Camp McCall is going to be back there. Awesome camp. Give it up for Camp McCall. Yes. Come on. Camp McCall is going to be in the back. And then next week, we have Clayton and Shari King coming to talk about relationships. Come on. So invite people, bring them along, bring some people with you. But before we continue in worship, I want to say something that's been on my heart the past couple days. And it's about information and just the influx that I have. And I know y'all have been phenomenal listeners, but just stay with me just for a second. An ocean of information is worthless without an ounce of application. An ocean of information is worthless without an ounce of application. You can know all you need to know. You can have all the knowledge. You can have a well that's deep, full of knowledge. But if you're not applying it, no transformation is ever going to happen. So apply this. You just had a phenomenal speaker come in and invest an hour of his time, pouring out his heart, pouring out the deep well of knowledge and decades of faithfulness in a relationship. But you can have all this information, and if you don't apply it, it's just going to sit there. So we're going to pray, and then we're going to worship the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for these people. I thank you for this group. I thank you for my friends, my family, the people I get to do life with, God. I thank you that I go to this university. Lord, we worship you. We praise your name. God, it is a miracle that we are even here, that we live in Tigerville, South Carolina, and have roommates and have friends here, God, and we get to hear your word spoken so eloquently by those around us. Lord, I pray that as we see and recognize these blessings, that we will be led to worship you. Not some person, not anybody's name, not for the sake of anybody else, but for the advancement of your kingdom. We love you, Lord. We worship you now. In your name we pray. Amen.
Y'all can stand up. We're going to go ahead and go into some worship right here, okay?